Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to video episode number 55, or for you podcast listeners, season 3, episode 9 of Music is Not a Genre. Each week I take a release or four from my collection. I discuss them, I give you my take on them, I throw in some interesting stufferino, and I connect it to my music, other music, and other things in the world. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. If you haven't, please take a moment to do so. Here on YouTube, if you're on a podcast platform, there is a link there to go check out the video version of this, and or if you're already a Patreon member, thank you so much for that. And if not, there's also a link below for that. Please go ahead and check out my Patreon page. You get exclusive videos and audio for other features here. Music is Not a Genre, including my new interview series, among other things, and live shows and things like that. So thanks to anyone who has signed up for that. This week, as we continue on with kind of the nascent strain here of me doing CDs instead of vinyl, if you've been following along, it's only the third, fourth week I've done this, I believe. I have a small collection of CDs that I've titled Third Stream Music, the JazzClassical Alchemy of Jacques Loussier. And I am doing my best to pronounce that name correctly because my son, who is learning French, will kill me if I don't. I have a lot of different things in my CD collection. As I've told you before, there's no restriction on the kind of music I will buy. If it's something that I find an interest in, I'll buy it. That can apply to anybody, sure. But I feel as though my collection, even as it stands today, which is much smaller than it used to be, is pretty eclectic. In this case, this is a strain of jazz, of many different kinds of jazz that I enjoy, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it a little bit in this relatively brief show. But before I do that, so the whole thing with Music is Not a Genre is to point out that although genres as labels do exist, they are by nature limiting, and they don't really describe everything that music can contain. Right. Not only that, their names often target certain people and shut out other people by design. And we are conditioned to hear a certain genre label and say, oh, I like that music, or I might like that music, or I don't like that music. And my contention here is that all of that is ridiculous, and it's it's a good idea for all of us to look beyond labels in every facet of the world, including music. So that said, there are two, really there are kind of two frames of mind with genres. And or there are 300 frames of mind, or there are 7 billion frames of mind, however you want to say. But I'm gonna simplify it to two, which is that there are people who believe that a certain type of music is, let's say rock music should not contain, keyboards, shouldn't contain banjo, shouldn't contain electronic beats, things like that. It takes it out of being rock music of any kind, right? And that's one school of thought, that if you are straying from what a genre should be, quote unquote, then it's no longer that genre, right? And the other school of thought, which, guess which one I belong to, is that the genre name is a suggestion, and the artist and the writer, the producer can throw in whatever they want to in that song, in that production, the performance, and call it whatever they want to call it. And fortunately, there are a lot of artists today. First of all, that I do believe that the internet has made it easier for people to see how false these distinctions are, how fluid genre can be, among other things. But secondly, there are a lot of young artists who wonderfully are mixing the genres, however they want to, and oftentimes creating something brand new. that they don't seem to really care what it's called, which is great, because that's, again, the whole point of this. Breland is a guy that comes to mind doing country music, but it's a very kind of R&B-ish, you know, funky country. Rina Sawayama is somebody I've mentioned a million zillion times because she's a British artist who mixes kind of, you know, electronic pop, funky pop kind of thing with metal, with just straight up, you know, heavy metal music, new metal, if you want to call it that, from that particular period. And not watering down any of those ones that I mentioned for either of those artists. It's not, oh, I'm going to take a piece of this, take a piece of that. It's like full blown of all of that, just slammed together, which I love. It's you know, been done in the past, but not to the, I think, the extent that it's being done now, right? And that's just popular music. You know, all the styles of popular music, there are, again, people who are purists about it and people who aren't. When you get into so-called highbrow music, which I talked about this in a podcast before, I don't like the terms highbrow and lowbrow for any kind of art, whether it's literature, visual art, music, you know, whatever. Those are false distinctions. They're very classist, sometimes often even racist, and they're elitist. And so, especially when you consider the origins of pretty much any kind of art. You know, we look at jazz and classical, in the subject this week, as what I'd call conservatory music these days, which is, for the most part, when you go to school to learn music, you're learning one of those, right? A lot of the people who come out, even someone as famous as Jean-Baptiste, you know, studied at Juilliard, studied jazz, you know, and the same, of course, is true for classical. But we forget that although that kind of music and every strain of classical and all the, you know, strains of jazz, it all started from just people playing music in an innovative way. And not only that, the idea that a certain taste is highbrow or a certain taste is lowbrow is, again, it's classist, it's elitist, it's racist, so many ists that are the negative kind. And I don't subscribe to that thought. But there are people who do, right? And in many cases, those people are even more staunchly purist about what constitutes jazz or what constitutes classical than the people who are more into popular music of whatever kind. You can, you know, for example, in the classical realm, there was a point at which the famous composer, you know, earlier on in the 20th century, Igor Stravinsky, released Rite of Spring and did a concert. There was a riot in the streets, basically, because it was dissonant and it added certain, you know, newish elements to classical or orchestral music, if you want to call it that instead, that weren't really being used very much, you know, except for maybe some 12-tone composers and some avant-garde and things like that. People flipped, you know, and it caused a great division among classical fans of orchestral music. And that's happened over and over and over again in history, of course, but especially in the 20th century when people started to seriously revere, more than ever, really, the old classics, you know, from the you know, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, Romantic eras, and all the ones, you know, in between and before and after. There became this kind of division of, well, then anything that came after or that started with Stravinsky or Schoenberg or Bartók, don't even consider that classical, you know, like that kind of a thing. In jazz, I'm going to use this, and you know, not to denigrate, you know, Wynton Marsalis, because I really respect him on so many levels. And this is a very old comment, and I don't know if his, you know, idea of it has changed or not, because I haven't followed him really. I was more of a Branford fan, if you must know. Wynton said many years ago that any jazz music or any music that sounds like jazz but is not based firmly in the blues, in some kind of blues structure or blues harmonics is not jazz. And the thing is, I've heard him play and he's amazing, and I bet you I would like a lot of what he does. But when I heard that many years ago, it turned me off of him because I completely disagree with that. That's where jazz started. Yes, absolutely that's where it started. It's one of the main influences of jazz was the blues. You know, not the only one, but probably the main one, you know, blues with improvisation. But, you know, jazz, any type of music can go wherever the hell it wants to go and wherever the artists say that they want it to go. And jazz has gone pretty much everywhere. You know, you're talking, it's followed into pop music and hip hop music and funk and fusion, rock, and, you know, which is fusion, but, you know, all avant-garde, you know, avant-garde and, you know, dissonant and all of that stuff, just abstracted to the nth degree and just, you know, turned inside, outside, upside down. If the artists who are doing it say it's jazz, then it's jazz, right? If the listener listens to it, says it's jazz, then it's jazz. That's a false distinction to me to say that if it's not bass in the blues, it's not jazz. But this is to illustrate that, and again, nothing against, you know, Wynton as a genius, you know, that he is. This is to illustrate how ridiculous these distinctions can get. The more you parse them out, you know, let's say this. Oh, well, you know, there's a jazz song that is kind of firmly based in the blues, but then it throws this extra chord in. Or there's a passage of improv that harkens, you know, more toward classical or uses a different scale than the blues scale, you know. Then what? You know, how far do you go? What do you say? It's okay to include that. Like you keep parsing it to the point where you can't even see the distinction anymore. And the reason why I'm saying all this, not only, and this is the thing that's awesome to me, when you think of classical, what do you think of? You think of maybe Mozart or Beethoven or Bach or, you know, Debussy or, you know, Schubert, if you like him, or Mahler, people like that. But mainly what you're thinking of is orchestral music that is notated precisely, and that's how you play it, right? When you think of jazz, what do you think of? You think of music that has improvisation as a major part of what it is. So if that's the case, and again, is jazz only blues-based improvisation, right? If that's the case, what is so much of what, you know, Miles Davis did or Wayne Shorter or so many people that came after him that had then Wayne Shorter, especially with that kind of impressionist, you know, thing that he has going on. Is that not jazz? I don't think I need to answer that for you. And what about classical? I mean, this one is the one, when I learned this years ago, it flipped me out to the point where I just realized how much in love with all this stuff I am, you know, again. And that is that, let me name some famous composers for you. And think sort of in reverse order, I don't know, chronologically. Franz Liszt, Friedrich Chopin, Mozart, Bach, and a dude that predated Bach named Dietrich Buxtehude, who was very Bach-like, but in his own way, you know, I don't know, he influenced Bach, right? All of those famous composers and many, 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 many more were well known in their time for having amazing improv skills. And you might say, all right, Chopin, sure, Liszt, you know, they were virtuosos on the piano. Of course, they probably messed around. Mozart was a genius, he could do whatever he wants. But Bach, you know, Bach's known for his very precisely written music. Thing is, A, a lot of that probably stemmed from improvisation, but, you know, B, they were well known for improv in their day. They were performers, you know, so they knew how to wow an audience. That just flipped my lid to the point where I was like, yeah, see, it's all connected in this, you know, and this is awesome, right? Excuse me a second. And to get to the point here this week, Jacques Loussier was someone who knew this. There was a point at which he was very young. He was, I believe he was playing, I want to say a Bach composition, although I'm not sure. He forgot part of it in the middle of the performance, so he just improv'd it. And I don't know if it was at that point or prior to that point, or, you know, or soon after, that it dawned on him that why not, right? So you look at this first CD here, the people who can see it, and I will tell you listeners, it's called Jacques Loussier Plays Bach. It's from 1996. And you see that he decided at a certain point, well, the point was around 1959, that Bach lent itself really super well to jazz improv. And he did a series of albums with his trio back then, which I'll skip ahead slightly to this one here, 1999. For you viewers, I'll hold it up, called The Bach Book, which is a compilation of those, or actually it's a sampling, sorry. It's a sampling of those early Bach recordings. But he was the first person. There are people who had done a little bit of classical, you know, jazz improv before then, but, you know, especially for people, for, you know, composers like Debussy, Ravel, Satie, and the French Impressionists and other people from other countries in that era, where their chords were sort of already morphing into what will be known as more complex jazz before jazz even existed. So they lent themselves very well to that kind of improvisation, and many people have done improvs on Satie especially, and, you know, and things like that. But any of those composers, but no one at the time thought to ever do improv jazz music, you know, based in Bach's compositions. And, you know, he became super famous for that. And then he went on, which, by the way, that kind of music, why I titled this, that kind of music was termed, I believe, in the 1950s by somebody else as third stream music, which basically just meant you're taking classical music, you're playing it in a jazz style with improv, whatever, still with some classical chops, and creating something new. And that was the third stream. So Jacques Loussier became very well known for third stream music, right? And then he went on to do other composers, such as here, this 1997. You can see the period which I was into him when I was still buying CDs. 1997 CD, where he does Vivaldi's The Four Seasons as jazz. Oh my God, that's amazing. Bach, as far as these go, in front of you, Bach's still my favorite, but that was pretty damn amazing. And then, of course, he did in 1998 Satie, which, I mean, he's from France. You knew eventually he was going to get around to him, right? I believe he's also done Debussy. I believe he's also done, well, he's done Beethoven, he's done Chopin, he's done Robert Schumann, which I was really surprised. I thought was kind of awesome. I've played all of these composers on the piano at one point, back especially when I had pretty decent classical chops, you know, nothing to write home about, but good enough. And, you know, these were some of my favorites. Chopin, especially, is still, you know, probably in my tops as far as piano music goes. Bach is just wonderful to play. And Mozart, you know, and Beethoven. But Schumann was a surprise. I played through his work, Scenes from Childhood, and really, they're just like songs, you know, and I loved, you know, I always preferred Schumann to Schubert, and I know you're saying, like, well, is there even a, you know, connection? But, you know, in my head there is. I made the connection because of the, you know, SCHU, I guess, in the beginning of their name. And I just loved that. So it was cool for me to see that Loussier did that too, because I didn't know that. Why? Because after 99, obviously, I lost track of him. And sadly, he died 20 years later in 2019. At the age of, I believe, 85, 84, 85, something like that, after having had a stroke in 2011, which is what ended his performing career. Which, by the way, he's also was a composer for, you know, for his albums, but also for film, and did his inimitable style of third stream jazz classical, but with his own compositions. So I'm just honestly saying I am psyched to find out that he had done so much more, and especially with some composers I absolutely love. And I plan on adding that to my list, which right now is actually not that large. You know, at one point it was up to about 20 different things to listen to, and now it's down to 3. So I'm going to add him to the list and check out some of those other composers that he has interpreted, because that's, I don't know, it's awesome to me, right? And the thing is this, about all this, good works can exist the way they are. They don't need reinventing, right? You can listen to Mozart and know that if it's done well by great performers, what else does it need? Nothing. But the way someone like Jacques Loussier, and in particular, again, I fell in love with his Bach and then the Satie, but even the Vivaldi, you really should check that out if that's what you're into more than any of the others, because that is very accessible. All of it is really, but that especially, is that it brings it so into the moment. It makes it like it is alive again in a way that strictly playing the notes on the page can't. It can, but not really. Not really. And so performers like this, and in a sense, and composers who do this, really make what we wrongly considered to be kind of stodgy, old music contemporary again. Because we have to remember that when popular music of any kind came out, it was called that because it was popular, meaning populace, meaning people loved it, meaning it was, the term folk music comes from the word folk, which means people. So what's the difference between popular, pop, folk? That, again, my contention is none, or not enough to make distinctions like that. And even, and especially, classical music of whatever era, when it was popular, it was pop music. And somebody like Loussier, again, kind of brings you back to understanding a little better why that might have been and feeling it again like it's brand new, A quick note that jazz and classical, again, like I said in the beginning, have popped up in a lot of different styles of music. Most recently that I've heard, I'll say that, I kept hearing this damn song in drugstores and didn't know who it was till I looked it up. And wouldn't you know it, it's Maroon 5, the band that's always there. It's a song called Memories, and it is absolutely, you listen to it, and if you know Pachelbel's Canon in D, which is a pretty famous composition, super popular in the 80s and 90s especially, it is based on that. It's 100% certain, based on Pachelbel's Canon in D, and that was from 2019. That's how recent that was. I'm sure there are some that are even more recent. There's been so many compositions that have been based on classical music. For example, Barry Manilow's hit "Could It Be Magic" was based on a Chopin etude. I believe it was an etude. And if you listen to the two back to back, again, no question, absolutely true. Quite a few hits from the 40s and 50s with vocalists, who were especially crossing over from opera to pop or jazz vocals, were based in classical music. It just goes on and on and on and on. But then there's also music that's not based in a composition like that, but has elements of that, has a style like that. You think of certain string arrangements from the Beatles or the Moody Blues, or honestly it's shown up even in hip hop, or certainly progressive rock, which has used jazz, classical, and everything else you can think of. Not basing it on a specific composition, but just using that style. Right, and that is something, again, that I always love when I hear that pop up. That's something that kind of thrills me if it's done really well. I mean, you think of, like, I don't know, Eleanor Rigby, right, is an easy one to call up from the Beatles. That's not based on anything, but it has that string ensemble. It's completely a string ensemble other than the vocals. Very classical. Far as what I've done, I have certainly incorporated a lot of jazz here and there, not as much classical, but some. And the compositions that come to mind for me would be a song from my band Rex album, Syzygy for the Weird. Polymath uses a harpsichord sound, and there are a couple of passages in there that are very classical. And yet it is an electronic kind of, downbeat funky song. But it fits. But more than that, a few years ago, I did a soundtrack to a film called Lockload Love. And I did two pieces in which I took ensembles playing some well-known classical songs, added jazz rhythms and other elements, little improv, to them, and then overlaid that with some space sounds. And called it classical space jazz, or classical muzak is, I think, what I called it at the time. And they were clearly influenced by this man here, Jacques Loussier, with maybe a little bit of Esquivel thrown in there on top, you know, like sprinkles. So that's what this is all about, you know, the blurring of boundaries. And I really, really recommend that you listen to anything you can pick up. If there's a favorite classical composer who's fairly well known, there's a good chance that Jacques Loussier did interpret that composer. Go find it and see what you think. Do you know him already? I'd love to know what your opinion is of him, or of any music like this, any other third stream artist. Have you heard, if you watch Colbert, have you heard at times when Jean-Baptiste puts some classical stuff into what he's doing with the jazz? He's somebody who I think is very aware of third stream, and one of probably hundreds or thousands today who are still doing this. Can you tell me some of the contemporary third stream artists? Because I haven't been following that, and I would really love to know, especially if you know. Or do you hate all this? Are you a purist? Are you somebody who's like, that's not jazz, or that's not classical, or whatever it is? I want to know about that too. Whether you agree or disagree, or love or hate, have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, or know even more than what I'm saying. I want to know, because as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you, and until next time.